A policy to transform the media sector is in the pipeline. Communications Minister Nomvula Mokonyane revealed this in Boksburg yesterday. She was delivering a keynote address of Community Media Summit. The two-day ended yesterday with delegates calling for the public to participate and influence decision-making. For more on this, we're joined in the studio by Mdda CEO Zukiswa Botje. Thank you so very much, ma'am, for joining us here on Afro Breakfast.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. As a start, in this Community Media Summit, what is the involvement really of the Mdda in the process of, changing the face of media?
I think for us, first we say that the community media is or are key drivers for media pluralism and freedom of expression, really. So we're wanting every South African, every citizen in South Africa to be spoken to, spoken with in the languages they understand as government disseminates information.
And what have you identified as having been the gaps in terms of achieving these goals, in terms of media pluralism, as one would say?
All right, so what we focus on at the Mdda through its grant funding, we establish community media projects, we support them, we strengthen them, and what we've identified as government and the Mdda, because the Mdda cannot be divorced from government because it receives some of its money, particularly because when we receive the budget, 60% of that budget has to go to establishing the media, strengthening the community media in particular. And so what we've identified is that the budget itself is not enough.
Yeah.
And when the issues of budget are an issue for the community media, those impact on the sustainability of the sector. So the sustainability has come out being one of the critical issues that government have to look at. But we have impressed upon the sector itself to say that we've got to look at other sources of revenue. For instance, some of the money that the Mdda gets, it does not only get from government, but we also receive funding from broadcasters, and that is legislated. But we are saying that the print industry has walked away, and we are saying that it is time that we go back and talk to them to actually then bring some funding to the table so that we can strengthen this important sector of ours called the community media sector.
Perhaps I should have started here, but take us through, the past 2 days and the issues that were addressed and perhaps policy that will then be implemented at this media summit. What took place in these past 2 days?
In the past 2 days, really, we asked the sector to deliberate on the challenges. And some of the challenges, as I've said, is sustainability. There are issues of compliance, issues of corporate governance, that hamper their ability to then source revenue from the industry. And we've discussed those. In particular, if I might talk about the Mdda Act itself, we are saying that we're open to reviewing our act in so much that there is more representation of the sector itself on the board. That is number one. So we are saying that we would like to review the act so that the NCRF, which is the National Community Radio Forum, and the AIP, which is the Association for Independent Press, that they are represented on the board. At the moment, they are not. Why we are wanting that and we're open to that is because we will never be in a position to understand the issues of the sector without the sector itself represented on the board.
It does seem that, community media is sort of swallowed, I suppose, by the bigger sort of media houses. And I wonder if it is, and perhaps you can correct me, I wonder if it is possible to turn the tide where community media will indeed have a bigger voice. And do we know strategies in terms of addressing that and how that could possibly be achieved?
In fact, I don't think that point is correct. I don't think that the community media is swallowed. In fact, I think that the print itself alone publishes about 7 million copies of print per month, reaching about 3 times that audience, right? So I don't think it's swallowed. I think it is just a conscious, it's a conscious thing among South Africans to say, for instance, I'm here now, I could be with Soweto TV or any other TV, for instance.
Yeah.
So I could be listening to a particular radio station, and yet I could be listening to Alex FM. So it is really about us South Africans also reaching out to them, but also making use of the community media and listening to them and understanding where they come from and where, for me, and I speak on behalf of government and the MDDA, we are seeing, in fact, we are saying they are key drivers for pluralism. They are key drivers for freedom of expression. And I think that they've got a bigger role. In fact, they've got a bigger reach. It's just that we're not focused and we're not paying attention as the citizens of South Africa in the role the community media sector is playing in South Africa.
You know, I want to talk about print media. You raised the issue of print media. And immediately when I think print media, I'm thinking, you know, newspapers, what we're used to in that sense. It does seem that there is less buy-in. And I suppose it's because of the advent of your social media, whether it's your Twitters, your Facebook. You know, information is so readily available and so immediate on these particular platforms. Were those issues looked into in terms of perhaps print media finding innovative ways, new ways of getting, you know, information out and profiting? I mean, we have been seeing, unfortunately, Ms. Boche, that there are newspapers that are shutting down. There are newspapers who are having to sort of retrench staff, all kinds of things. And I wonder if there are other ways, other avenues that can perhaps be looked into than what we're used to, the hard copy of that newspaper, which it seems people aren't necessarily buying into really anymore.
Certainly. So we had part of the panelists in the summit, particularly yesterday, were professors from universities.
Yeah.
And we dealt at large with the issue of digital literacy. And we're saying both to print and broadcast that you should not look at your traditional broadcast, especially in the advent of the fourth industrial revolution. So we talked about a lot about trying to migrate and integrate ourselves as the community media sector into the digital space, digital platforms. So as I'm speaking here today, you should also be able to hear and watch what I'm saying here today on digital platforms. We're saying the same thing about to print, to say that don't necessarily only look at your traditional newspaper, expand, diversify. You should be able to find a copy of that newspaper also on digital platforms. And those issues were deliberated at length yesterday. And we had universities taking us through what sort of courses and programs they have. And there's a lot of need for training and development, for research and capacity building in the sector, and we take that point.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of the fourth industrial revolution, because that was where I was going. Part of the aim is aligning community media with the developments of the fourth industrial revolution. This is one of the topics that you covered quite extensively during this two-day summit. What does this mean, and how do we get the community media, you know, sort of in line or aligned with the fourth industrial revolution?
All right, first, at the MDDA at the moment, when we receive a new application for a project, for instance, especially on the radio platform, we're no longer funding or buying or purchasing the analog studio for them. So we are already going digital. That's one of the preparations. But we were saying at the summit that we will never be ready if we don't understand what makes us get ready. So that is why digital literacy was very key in the summit yesterday, to say this is what DTT means, and it means it requires you to be ready in this format. And so we actually went big on digital literacy to say, in order for us to get ready, let's take a step back and let's go back to basics and actually start with literacy first as we ready ourselves for the migration of the country towards DTT.
All right, you talk about getting ready for, digital literacy. But my question is, all right, the summit is done, the 2 days is over. What's your first step now in terms of addressing the issue of community media and then really needing to get on board and streamlining community media?
All right. Let me just take a step back. There's one thing I wanted to say.
Yeah.
There were issues that were cross-cutting at the summit. So we looked at print, and we had print stream, and we had broadcast streams, and largely the summit was in a plenary format. But we had those streams so that they could deliberate sufficiently on the issues of interest in them.
Yeah.
But there were topics that were overarching. And one of them was by the GCIS, the acting DG of GCIS, Ms. Pumla Williams, where she talked about the 30% set aside. Because that is of interest to both the media, and it talks to issues of sustainability. And so she said that, in fact, we know as government, and we take that point and we take the responsibility that that needs to actually be regulated.
Yes.
That 30% of government ad spend has got to be given to the community media. But we're saying, as we ready ourselves and through legislation or whatever form of policy that we want to put in place, we're saying to the community media, also get your house in order, that your governance has got to be in order, your compliance issues have got to be in order. We also had SARS as one of the speakers to say, in terms of compliance with SARS, this is what we mean, this is what we would like you to be ready with. For instance, the issue of the boards, just the responsibilities or the segregation of duties between the board and the management of the station is very key to that compliance. So we talked about issues like that. But if I come back to your question as to what we deliberated on and what is the way forward, it's very clear. When we're given the mandate by the Minister and the Deputy Minister of Communications to actually host the summit as the MDDA on their behalf, we were told that we have been belaboring the point. We have summits, we have had summits and colloquiums and forums after forum as government, and we take that. But what was different with this summit in the past 2 days was that when the two political principals realized that in the past few years, we actually had a summit with print only without broadcast. We had a summit with broadcast only without print. She said, no, that is not correct. Bring them together. It is one family. They actually have to learn, not only learn from each other, but we must integrate. And because they work and they are assisted and supported by the same Department of Communications, the GCIS, and the entities of the Department of Communications. So they must listen to the political principles thinking at the same time, and they must be under one roof. That was the first thing. And then the minister and the deputy minister then said, we are not looking for another session where we're just going to put the challenges on the table and walk away without solutions. So the focus of the summit in the past 2 days at Birchwood was for us to actually look more at what solutions, because we are aware of the challenges. Yes. We're very much aware of the challenges. As I was preparing for the summit, I was reading documents after documents. Challenges are very glaring. So broadcast would say we are struggling with the Centec fees, and government, you're not coming to the party with the 30%, and also so the compliance, because it is in their space and it's government that is trying to enforce it. So they tend to shy away on those things. And we said, let's be frank, let's be honest. So the minister and the deputy minister then said, we are actually looking at a session that will be solution driven. So in the build-up to the conference and in the preparations for the conference or the summit, we then said, the sector itself must engage itself through its structures. So the broadcast was engaged through the structure of the National Communication Radio Forum, the NCRF, and then we wrote to the AIP, and we also wrote to the co-ops in the provinces. We met those that we could. Why? Because we said, instead of the top-down, let's have a bottom-up approach where the sector itself then fits into the discussions and the deliberations of the summit, so that we're progressive in our discussions, and that's what we did. So we got a position paper from the broadcast, which is radio and TV, and we got a position paper from print, and then we said, okay, then the deliberations, the plenaries, the commissions should be anchored around what they are raising. But in those papers already, in those position papers, we said, give us, if you're saying Centec and the fees, already say to us what are the possible solutions,
yes,
so that when we craft an action plan, that's what the minister said, that after this I want an action plan where we sit as the government and the entities and including the sector to say, okay, these are the deliberations and this is the report which we are hoping, I'm not putting my team on the spot here, we're hoping to produce it in the next 2 weeks, because one of the outcries is that government, you engage us almost every year in these forums and whatever you want to call it, colloquiums and so forth, but you never really give us the reports, you never give us the reports on time, or we never even see the light of the report. Yeah. So this particular report, because this report belongs to Mama Action, and we know who Mama Action is.
And speaking of Mama Action, I want to actually put you on the spot, and perhaps putting her on the spot as well, getting you into trouble here. I mean, she was there during, with the closing address, and
yes,
you said to me one of the sort of main issues when we began this conversation. You said one of the main challenges is the issue of funding, and I suppose her being, the head is the one who would be dealing with the issue of funding. Is there a willingness, apart from having these talk shops? I mean, you were given the mandate to host the summit by Mama Action, but is there a willingness on her part to not just have these summits and these talk shops, which I suppose are a great start, but to address the issue of funding, which will then address the issues that then need to be addressed? Is there a willingness from the minister and the deputy minister in those, when you engage those conversations of funding?
Oh yes, certainly. We've already engaged them. Yeah. The sector itself has already engaged them, but we are beginning to say to the sector, we ought to be looking broader and beyond government itself, like as in the Department of Communications, in trying to source more funding. In fact, we're of the view that our funding model as the Mdda has got to be relooked. The funding that the Mdda gets from the department clearly is not enough to actually service the sector. Hence, we've got more funding from the broadcast. In fact, more money is from the broadcasters. But we're beginning to say, okay, print also come on board. But I mean, you've got institutions like the lotteries. So we're saying part of the mandate of the Mdda is to lobby. And so I'm certain that we will be getting matching orders from the departments, from the ministry and our political leaders to say, do this and do that. But we know where we can also get funding. We are cognizant, and we are stressing and impressing upon this point to the sector that government does not have enough money. The fiscus, I think we must be real about that. The fiscus is constrained. So we must look beyond. In fact, there's a talk already of saying, how can we leverage from the ad spend, even from the private sector? So we're saying in terms of that 30%, the 30% must not only come from government, as in government, pure government. We've got entities that are funded by the state, and we're beginning to say that must also be, it must also come then from those state-owned entities. But also we must also look beyond. You know, we had one of the speakers from Rwanda, a Rwandan radio, a colleague and a delegate and a speaker, and he said when they started the radio station, I think in 2011 from scratch, they were assisted by a donor. He was very practical. I liked the example. They were assisted by a donor, and he was giving us the amount of expenditure versus the donor that they were, the donor fund that they were getting. It was just the surplus was the deficit was becoming more and bigger. And he said they wanted to be independent. In fact, he says after 2-3 years they felt so constrained that they wanted to actually kick the donor out. And in fact, they walked away from the donor. And he says when they started sourcing their own revenue, because I think it's one of the things that we are trying to impress upon the sector to say, even though you are non-profit, but conduct your business as if you are a business, a viable business. So that viability and sustainability is important, and it will work when we get our compliance and our governance issues in place. So if I go back to the Rwandan example, and he says once we actually got out of this donor funding, because he was saying it was really like, begging and asking, and he says in the first year we were able to generate 1 million, and our deficit was actually so minimal that we could manage it. And because they wanted to see themselves sustained, and they wanted to sustain themselves away from it. And we are hoping that in the future we could actually look at a community media that would be sustainable on its own. But of course, print is saying, government, look at assisting us, because 40% of our revenue goes back to the printing cost. It's very expensive. So they said yesterday and the other day that let's look as government, look at funding printing presses in provinces. Yeah. So we're beginning to call on SALGA to say, SALGA, because you're responsible for the municipalities in the provinces, how do we then assist? Because you find a radio station that is renting a space, right? And they can't even afford, because there's just so many costs with the broadcast side. There's Centec fees, there's so many fees, there's SAMRO fees, there's so many, so that then because they're not generating enough, they get into debt. Yeah. And sometimes they get locked out. And we're saying, SALGA, and we are cognizant of we want the independence of that voice of those radios to always remain. And we're saying, SALGA, how could you help? Yeah. Firstly, by ensuring that 30% from the municipalities also flow in. If you're able to house them, so that when they are in a predicament of a rent, then at least we know it's government to government and we can deal with those issues.
All right, it's been a great pleasure. Such an enlightening input you've given us. We appreciate your time. That's Ukiswa Borje, who's the Mdda CEO, talking to us about the Community Media Summit that took place the last 2 days. And of course, seeking to align community media with the developments of the 4th Industrial Revolution. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time. Let's take a short break. Do stay with us.